I have learned to listen to rooms the way other men listen to weather. A room tells you things before the people in it open their mouths, if you have spent enough years standing still inside one. And the amber salon, on the morning the journalists came, was telling me something I did not yet have a word for. I am Corwin Vale, and for 19 years I have stood the posts of Harrowgate Palace in the service of the royal house of Harrowgate, which is to say in the service of the Kingdom of Eldermoor and, more particularly, of Queen Saralind, who is the best of us and asks the least. I am not a clever man in the way that courtiers are clever. I cannot draft a treaty or trade an epigram across a dinner table. What I can do is hold a post for 6 hours without shifting my weight, and notice in the holding the one small thing that is wrong. It is not a glamorous gift. It has, on certain mornings, been the only thing that mattered. That morning, the room was being arranged for a press interview, a rare thing, and a deliberate one. The Crown of Eldermoor did not open its private rooms to recorters and microphones lightly, but the realm had passed through a difficult winter grain shortages in the eastern counties, a flood that took 2 bridges, a tax dispute that had grown loud in the broadsheets, and the Queen had decided that the people deserved to hear her own voice, unmediated, answering hard questions in her own home. It was, the Chamberlain had said with the faint distaste of a man watching a clean floor be mudded, a gesture of openness. I disliked it the way I dislike all gestures of openness, which is to say not at all in principle and entirely in practice. Openness is a door, and a door is a thing that lets people in. So I had come early before the lights and the cables, and I had walked the amber salon slowly, the way I walk a room I will be responsible for. It is a long chamber, paneled in pale gilded wood the color of old honey, which is how it earned its name. Tall windows on the east wall let in the morning. A great fireplace, cold in summer, anchored the far end beneath a portrait of a long-dead king whose painted eyes have watched 100 years of palace business and learned, I think, to keep their counsel. There were 2 chairs set facing each other near the windows, a low table between them, a carafe of water, 2 glasses. The Queen would sit in one chair. The journalist would sit in the other. Between them, the cameras and the questions. I walked the perimeter. I checked the window latches, though the windows would not be opened. I looked behind the long damask curtains, though no one would hide there with 11 other people in the room. I am not a suspicious man by temperament. Suspicion is exhausting, and a tired guard is a useless one, but I am a thorough one by training, and there is a difference. The suspicious man expects the worst everywhere and so sees it nowhere clearly. The thorough man expects nothing and notices everything. It was while I was noticing everything that the room began to tell me its small wrong thing. The press team arrived in a cheerful clatter, the way press teams do, 6 of them, with a wheeled case of lights, a tangle of black cables, 2 cameras on tripods, and the brisk false friendliness of people who have learned to be liked quickly because their work depends on it. Their credentials had been vetted a week in advance by the palace press office, then again at the outer gate, then again at the inner door where my colleague Wren stood with the list and a pen. By the time they reached the amber salon, they had been confirmed 3 times. I watched them set up. I watched them tape their cables to the floor so no one would trip. I watched them measure the light with little gray cards and frown at the windows. And I watched the journalist. Her name on the list was Ilith Marrow, and she was a correspondent for one of the larger broadsheets, the kind that ran long, serious pieces and prided themselves on never raising their voices, which made them more dangerous than the ones that shouted. She was perhaps 40, slim, composed, dressed in a tailored slate-gray blazer with a high collar. She wore a press lanyard around her neck and carried a leather notebook she did not open. She introduced herself to the Chamberlain with exactly the right amount of warmth and exactly the right amount of deference, and she shook his hand, and she said how grateful she was for the opportunity, and every word of it was correct. That was the first thing. I cannot tell you why correctness troubled me. A great many honest people are correct, But there is a kind of correctness that comes from feeling a thing and a kind that comes from having rehearsed a thing. And after 19 years of watching people meet the crown, I have learned, not always, but often, to tell them apart. The honest, grateful person fumbles a little. They are slightly overwhelmed by the room, by the portraits, by the weight of where they are standing. Ilith Marrow was not overwhelmed by anything. She moved through the amber salon as though she had already been there in her mind 100 times. She knew where the chairs would be. She knew which window the light would come from. When the chamberlain gestured to her chair, she sat without being shown which one, and she sat in the right one. A small thing, I filed it. The second thing was the lanyard. Press lanyards at Harrowgate are issued the morning of an event, from the press office, on a particular cord, a flat woven band in the palace's dark green, with the credential card sealed in a frosted sleeve. Every member of the team wore one. Ilith Marrow wore one too, but hers hung a half-inch lower than the others, and when she leaned forward to set her notebook on the table, it swung, and I saw that the cord behind her collar was not flat-woven green but round, black, and slightly thicker, and that the green band was a loop knotted onto it, near the back, where the collar would hide the join. It is the kind of thing you would never see unless you had stood in enough rooms watching enough lanyards to know exactly how they are supposed to hang. I have. I did. I did not move. I want to be clear about that because the whole of what follows turns on it. A lesser guard, a younger me, would have crossed the room, would have asked, would have made the wrong thing visible to everyone before he understood what it was, and in doing so would have warned it and lost it. The first power of my post is not the rifle on my shoulder or the order I can give. The first power of my post is that I am furniture. I am a red coat and a tall hat and a pair of white gloves, and the people who come to do wrong in this palace have learned to look straight through me, the way you look through a lamppost. They forget I have eyes. They forget I can think. That forgetting is the most useful tool I own, and I have never spent it cheaply. So I stood, and I watched the lanyard and the woman it belonged to, and I began, quietly, behind a face that showed nothing, to count the things that were wrong. There were, by the time the lights were on, and the cameras were warm, 4 of them. The correctness, the lanyard, and then the third. When she opened her notebook at last and uncapped a pen, she wrote nothing. She held the pen poised over the page the way a person holds a prop, and her eyes were not on the page at all. They were moving across the room, the windows, the doors, the portrait, the place where the queen would sit measuring, the way I measure. Not the eyes of someone preparing questions, the eyes of someone preparing a space. The fourth thing I did not see so much as feel, and I have learned to trust the things I feel in a room as much as the things I see, because they are usually the same thing arriving by a slower road. The feeling was this: she was waiting for a moment. Not nervous waiting, the way one waits to meet a queen. Aimed waiting, the waiting of a person who has one chance to do a thing and has practiced the doing of it until her hands know it without her. Across the salon, the chamberlain clapped his soft hands together and announced that Her Majesty would join us in 10 minutes. The press team made their last adjustments. A young man checked the cameras. The sound technician, a heavy-set fellow with a cart of equipment and headphones around his neck, moved among them with a small device in his hand, and I watched him too, because sound technicians carry recorders, and recorders were the whole reason a part of me had not relaxed since I walked through the door. He was sweeping. That is the word for what he was doing, though he did it casually, as a man checks the time. He held the little device low against his leg and walked a slow circuit of the room, and at one point he passed near the queen's chair, and the device in his hand did something, I could not see what. But I saw his face change, the smallest tightening at the corner of his mouth, and then he straightened and put the device in his pocket and went on as though nothing had happened. That was the 5th thing, and 5 is a number I do not ignore. I want to tell you what I knew at that moment, and what I did not, because the difference is the whole of my trade. I did not know there was a recording device in the room. I had not seen one. I could not have pointed to it. If the chamberlain had turned to me and asked, on his honor, whether the room was clean, I could not have sworn that it was not. But I knew the shape of a thing being smuggled, the way you know the shape of a storm from the way the birds go quiet, the correctness, the lanyard that was not a lanyard, the pen that wrote nothing, the aimed waiting, and a sound technician who had swept the room and found something and decided, with a tightening of his mouth, to say nothing about it. 6 people on the press team. One of them at least was not what the list said, possibly 2. And in 10 minutes, the Queen of Eldermoor was going to walk into this room and sit down in that chair and speak, in her private voice, about matters of state. And someone in this room had come to take that voice away with them in a way the Crown had not agreed to. I had 10 minutes, and the first thing I had to do with them was nothing. That is the part no one understands about my post who has not stood it. The hardest order I have ever obeyed, the one I have obeyed 10,000 times, is the order to do nothing while every instinct in my body says move. To stand at attention while a man screams an inch from my face. To hold the line while a crowd surges. And now, to stand quiet by the wall, eyes forward, a statue in a red coat, while a plot I could feel but not yet name assembled itself in front of me, because the one thing I could not afford to do was let it know I had seen it. If I crossed the room now and demanded the technician's pocket be emptied, I would find a device perhaps, and I would have one device and a great deal of noise, and a roomful of warned conspirators who would close like a fist. The honest members of the press team would be outraged. The story tomorrow would not be about the Queen's openness. It would be about a paranoid palace and a strong-armed guard and the silencing of the free press. And whoever had truly planned this, for I did not believe Ilith Marrow had planned it alone, would walk out the gate clean, having learned only to do it better next time. No, I would not give them noise. I would give them silence and patience and the one thing they had not planned for, a lamppost with eyes. I caught Wren's gaze across the room. He was at the inner door where he had checked the list. We have served together 11 years, Wren and I, and we have a language that does not use words, a tilt of the chin, a stillness held a beat too long, the way you set your feet. I held his eye and let my gaze go slowly to the sound technician's cart, and then back. Wren's expression did not change at all. But he shifted his weight once onto his left foot, which is our sign for I see it, I am ready. And then he looked, without seeming to, at the chamberlain, asking me, in the same silent grammar, do we stop this? I gave him the smallest movement of my head, not yet. Because I did not have it yet. I had a feeling and 5 wrong things, and a feeling and 5 wrong things is enough to make a guard watch and not nearly enough to make him act. If I was wrong, if the lanyard was a manufacturing flaw and the empty notebook was nerves, and the technician had merely found a loose cable, then I would have humiliated an honest correspondent, embarrassed the Crown, and turned a gesture of openness into a scandal of suspicion, all on the strength of a bad feeling. The discipline of my post is not only the discipline to stand still under provocation, it is the discipline to be certain before I move. A guard who acts on every feeling is not vigilant. He is merely frightened, and a frightened guard does more harm than an absent one. So I needed to turn 5 wrong things into one true thing, and I had perhaps 8 minutes left to do it. I let my eyes move slowly, idly, the bored sweep of a man who has stood a long post and is thinking about his supper. No one watches a bored guard. I swept the room the way Ilith Marrow had swept it, but where she had measured the space, I measured the people, and I asked of each of them the only question that mattered. If I were going to hide a thing in this room, where would I put it, and who would I trust to place it? The young man at the cameras was too nervous. His nerves were the right kind, the overwhelmed kind. The 2 assistants taping cables were absorbed in their work, glancing now and then at the door the Queen would use, the way honest people glance at a door they are awed by. The chamberlain was the chamberlain, fussing. The sound technician had gone still by his cart, headphones on now, fiddling with a dial, and Ilith Marrow sat in her chair with her unwritten notebook and her aimed patience and waited. If the device was already placed, and the technician's sweep told me it might be, then it was not on her person. It was in the room, near the Queen's chair, where the sweep had caught it, which meant that the placing had already happened before I had arrived, or in the bustle of the setup when 6 people moved freely about a room, and one more small black object among the cables and clips and gaffer's tape would draw no eye at all. And it meant that the technician knew where it was. He had found it. He had not reported it. He was the keeper of the secret, whatever the secret was, and a man who keeps a secret cannot help, however disciplined he is, glancing at the thing he is keeping. It is one of the oldest truths of my trade. People look at what they are guarding. The eye returns to it the way a tongue returns to a sore tooth. So I watched the technician's eyes, and I waited for them to tell me where the thing was. They told me in under a minute. He was adjusting a microphone on its stand near the Queen's chair, the legitimate microphone, the one that would carry her voice cleanly to his recorder for the broadcast. He crouched to set the height, and while he crouched, his eyes flicked down once to the underside of the low table between the 2 chairs, to the lip of it, where the wood folded under and a hand could reach a thing that no eye from any chair would ever see. His gaze touched the spot for less than the length of a heartbeat, and then it came up and went on, and he never looked there again, which is exactly what a man does who knows he must not look at a thing and cannot stop himself from doing it once. Under the table, the Queen's table, 18 inches from where her hands would rest. I had it now, not the device itself. I still could not have sworn to its existence, but its place and its keeper and the shape of the whole. A small recorder, fixed under the lip of the table where it would sit a foot from the Queen's voice for the length of the interview, gathering every word, including the words spoken when the cameras were off, between the official questions, when a queen relaxes and a journalist leans in and says asterisk off the record, ma'am, just between us. And that, I understood with a cold certainty, was the entire point. No one needed to smuggle a recorder into a press interview to capture what the Queen said asterisk on the record. The cameras would carry that to the whole realm. You smuggled a recorder to capture what she said when she believed she was asterisk off asterisk it. The pauses, the private aside. The unguarded human sentence that a careful queen, lulled by an hour of courteous questions, might let fall, and that, in a broadsheet stripped of its warmth and its context, could become a weapon. This was not a man chasing a scoop. A scoop is a thing you find. This was a trap built and placed to manufacture one. Now I knew. And now the hardest part of all began, because knowing changed nothing about what I had to do in the next 6 minutes, which was still, and exactly, nothing, until I could do the one right thing instead of the several wrong ones. I ran it through fast, the way you run a plan through when there is no time to write it down. I could cross now and take the device. I would have it in my glove in 4 steps. But I would have it in front of 6 people, 2 cameras and a chamberlain, and the moment I held it up the room would know, and the question every honest person in it would ask, and they would be right to ask it, was asterisk how did the guard know it was there? And I had no answer that was not I felt it, and I felt it is not a thing the Crown can stand on when the broadsheets asked the next morning why the palace tore apart a press team on a guard's hunch and cancelled the Queen's own gesture of openness. The device alone, snatched in the open, was not enough. I needed it taken in a way that was clean, defensible, and quiet, and I needed to take it without warning the people who had placed it, because the device was only the hand. I wanted the arm. I wanted to know who had made the lanyard that was not a lanyard, who had gotten Ilith Marrow's name onto a list that had been vetted 3 times, and whether the rot that let it happen ended at the gate or went deeper, into the house itself. A device caught is a problem solved. A device caught and followed is a problem cured. My whole instinct, honed over 19 years, was for the cure. But there was a wall against that instinct, and the wall was the Queen. In 6 minutes she would walk through that door, and the moment she sat in that chair the device would be live and a foot from her private voice, and I will not, ever gamble her trust against my curiosity. The cure could wait. The Queen could not. Whatever I did, it had to happen before she sat down. 6 minutes. One device under a table. A keeper who must not be warned. A room full of honest people who must not be alarmed. A queen who must not be exposed. And a guard who must do all of it without crossing the room, raising his voice, or moving more than he absolutely had to. I have stood 10,000 posts. I have never been more certain that the next 6 minutes were the post I had been standing them for. I caught Wren's eye again. This time I did not give him not yet. I gave him the long stillness that means now we begin, and then a single slow blink, which between us means follow my lead and do not ask why. He understood. He always understands. He straightened off the door and began, with the unhurried air of a man with nothing on his mind, to drift along the wall toward the chamberlain, close enough to speak to him quietly when the moment came, far enough that no one would mark the drift. And I began to move. Not toward the table. That was the one place I could not go first. I moved instead toward the windows, along the east wall, with the slow, heavy tread of a guard repositioning for the Queen's entrance, which was exactly the kind of movement the room expected to see, and so the kind no one watched. A guard shifting his post before the principal arrives is the most boring sight in a palace. I made myself that sight. I walked to the window nearest the Queen's chair, and I stopped there, and I turned to face the room, and I let my eyes go to the door the Queen would use, as though I were settling into position to receive her. And from there, without ever looking at it directly, I could see the underside of the table. There was nothing visible from the height of a standing man. Of course there was not. That was the point of the place. But I was no longer trying to see the device. I was waiting for the technician to confirm it to me one last time, and to confirm something else I needed to know, whether the device was passive, simply recording to its own memory, or whether it was a transmitter, sending what it heard to a receiver somewhere outside the room. Because if it transmitted, then there was a second person in this plot who was not in this room at all, sitting in a parked carriage or a quiet office with headphones on, and that person would know the instant the signal cut out, the instant I took the device, and would have time to vanish before I could put a hand near them. The keeper told me he could not help it. As the chamberlain announced 4 minutes, the technician bent again to his cart, lifted the corner of his headphones and listened, and then, satisfied, set them down. He was monitoring it. He was hearing what the hidden device heard through his own equipment right now in the empty of the Queen room. It transmitted. And the cart, the legitimate cart of legitimate sound equipment, was the cover for the receiver. Clever. Genuinely clever. A second recorder, an extra channel, hidden in plain sight among a dozen honest cables, indistinguishable to anyone who did not already know what they were looking for. So, a transmitter under the table, a receiver in the cart, a keeper at the cart with the headphones. And somewhere I was now certain at least one more person, beyond this room, beyond this palace perhaps, who had arranged for Eilith Marrow to be on the list, and who would want very much to know if anything went wrong. It was a good plot. I will say that for it, even now. It was patient and quiet, and it respected the rules of the place enough to slip between them rather than break them. It was the kind of plot you build when you understand that Harrowgate is not stormed but seeped into. Whoever had made it knew the palace. That was the thing that sat coldest in me, there at the window with 4 minutes left. Whoever had made it knew the palace, knew how the lanyards were issued, knew how the lists were vetted, knew that the off-the-record moment was where a queen could be caught. That is not knowledge a broadsheet correspondent has. That is knowledge from inside. But all of that was the arm, and the arm could wait. I came back hard to the hand and the clock. 3 minutes, the chamberlain said. Here is what I decided, standing at the window, and I decided it in the time it takes to draw one slow breath, because that is all the time a post ever gives you. I would not take the device in the open. I would not denounce the technician. I would not let the room see a guard accuse a press team. I would take the device cleanly, quietly, in a way that gave me a reason a child could understand, and I would do it in the half-minute of confusion that I myself would create. And then, the device in my glove and the room not yet sure what had happened, I would cancel the interview, not as an accusation but as a courtesy, and clear the room in a way that separated the people I wanted from the people I did not. So that when the dust settled, I would have the hand in my hand and the keeper where I could reach him, and the threads back to the arm still warm enough to follow. And the half-minute of confusion I would create with the oldest, dullest, least suspicious tool in a guard's possession. I would knock over the water. It is not in any manual. There is no chapter in the discipline of the guard titled asterisk on the deliberate spilling of a carafe. But I have learned in 19 years that the body of a guard moving by accident draws no suspicion at all, where the body of a guard moving on purpose draws every eye in the room. A clumsy guard is forgivable. A clumsy guard is human. And a clumsy guard who has knocked a carafe of water across a low table and onto the floor has, for 30 seconds, an unimpeachable, unquestionable, entirely innocent reason to be on his knees beside that table with his white gloves under its edge, mopping. I had the reason. Now I needed the moment, and the moment had to come before the Queen entered, and after the technician had stepped far enough from his cart that he could not, in the confusion, do anything quick to the receiver. I watched him. He was at the cart, fussing the dials, and I needed him away from it. So I gave him a reason to move, the same way I would give myself one. I turned my head a few degrees and let my gaze rest, with the flat patience of a guard, on the legitimate microphone by the Queen's chair, the one the technician himself had set, and I let my brow furrow, very slightly, the way a man's does when something is not quite right. Then I lifted one white-gloved hand, and without a word, beckoned the technician over with 2 fingers, and pointed at the microphone, and tilted my head as if to say that is leaning. It was not leaning, but a sound technician 3 minutes from a live interview with his sovereign cannot afford to ignore a guard pointing at his microphone, and he came quickly, the way a careful man comes when his careful work is questioned, away from the cart, around the low table to the microphone to check it. He bent to it. He found it straight, of course, and frowned and looked at me, and I gave him the small apologetic nod of a guard who has fussed over nothing, and he turned to go back to his cart, mildly annoyed, his mind already returning to his dials. And in the 2 steps it took him to turn, I stepped to the table, and I reached for the carafe to move it aside out of the Queen's way, a small courteous adjustment, the kind a guard makes, and my white glove, which has held a rifle steady through a 6-hour state funeral and never trembled, slipped on the cold glass, and the carafe went over. Water sheeted across the low table and ran off the edge and pooled on the parquet, and one of the glasses rolled and fell and did not break but rang, loud, on the wood. The room turned. The chamberlain made a small, horrified sound. The young man at the camera laughed before he could stop himself. And I, mortified, every inch the embarrassed guard who has shamed his coat with a clumsy hand, went down at once onto one knee beside the table, white gloves moving fast, righting the carafe, sweeping the water away from the cables, apologizing in the low, flat tone of a man who would rather take a wound than make a fuss. "My fault," I said, the only words I had spoken in the room all morning. "Forgive me. The cables, I'll see to it." And on the floor on one knee, with my head bent over the spreading water and my body between the table and every eye in the room, I reached my left hand under the lip of the table, into the dark where no standing man could see, and my fingers found it at once. A small, flat, hard thing, no bigger than a coat button, fixed to the underside of the wood with a pad of soft adhesive and trailing a hair-thin wire to a flat disc tucked deeper in. A transmitter and its tiny battery, exactly where the keeper's eyes had told me it would be. I did not snatch it. A snatch is a jerk, and a jerk is a thing the body telegraphs. I peeled it, slow, steady, the way you peel a splinter so it comes whole, and it came away into my white glove, the adhesive parting with a faint, reluctant tack that no one heard over the chamberlain's fussing and the rolling glass and the laughter. And I closed my hand around it, and I went on mopping water with the other, and for perhaps 4 seconds I was a guard on his knees cleaning up a spill, and in my left fist was the whole of the plot, and not one person in the room knew the world had just turned over. The keeper knew a heartbeat later. I felt it before I saw it, the change in the rooms, whether that I told you I have learned to read. The technician had reached his cart. He had put one hand to his headphones, idly, the way you touch a thing you are used to touching. And he had gone still, utterly, suddenly still, the stillness of a man whose ears have just gone from hearing a faint live hiss to hearing nothing at all. The signal had cut. The device under the table had gone dark in his headphones the instant my glove closed over it, and he knew, in that frozen second, exactly what that silence meant. I came up off my knee, slow and heavy and apologetic, the carafe righted, the water mostly gone, my right hand making a small useless mopping gesture with a handkerchief and my left hand at my side, closed, casual, holding the realm's secret in a fist of white kid leather. And as I rose I looked, for the first time all morning, directly at the technician. I have a face that does not say much. It is one of the qualifications for my work. But I let it say one thing to him, and one thing only, across the length of the amber salon, while the chamberlain scolded, and the press team chuckled, and Ilith Marrow sat very still in her chair. I let my eyes go to my closed left hand, and then back to his face, and I held them there. I have it, my eyes said. I have it, and I have you, and you are going to stand exactly where you are and say nothing, because the alternative is so very much worse. His face did a number of things in the space of 2 seconds. It is a remarkable thing to watch, the face of a man who has been caught and is doing the arithmetic of his options in real time, and finding every column comes out to ruin. There was the first jolt, the animal alarm. Then the calculation, can I bluff? Can I cross the room and demand he open his hand? Can I claim the device is mine, legitimate, a backup channel? And then the killing realization, which I watched arrive behind his eyes like a tide coming up a flat beach, that to claim the device was to admit he knew it was there, and to admit he knew it was there was to confess the whole of it in front of the cameras in the Queen's own house. He could not move. To move was to confess. So he did the only thing left to a caught man who is not yet ready to be caught. He did nothing. He stood by his cart with his dead headphones around his neck and his face arranging itself slowly into a careful blankness, and he waited to see what I would do. What I did was turn with the device in my fist and walk, unhurried, heavy, a guard about ordinary business, to the chamberlain. The chamberlain, Master Pell, is a thin, anxious man of 60 who has run the household ceremonies for 20 years and whose entire soul recoils from anything irregular. He was still dabbing at the spilled water with a look of personal injury when I reached him, and he opened his mouth, I am sure, to scold me for the carafe. I did not let him. I leaned close enough that no one else could hear, my back to the room, my voice the low, even murmur I keep for exactly these moments, and I said, Master Pell, do not change your face. Listen to me and do not look at the press team. To his great credit, he did not change his face. 20 years of ceremony had at least taught him that. He kept dabbing at the water, and he said, through a fixed and pleasant expression, Vale, what in the name of? There is a recording device that was hidden under Her Majesty's table, I said very quietly. It is in my glove. It transmits to a receiver in the sound team's cart. At least one member of this press team smuggled it in. The interview cannot proceed. We must clear this room now in the next 2 minutes before Her Majesty enters, and we must do it without the team understanding that we know what they did. I felt Master Pell go rigid beside me, A thin reed of a man turned suddenly to iron, and I will say this for him too. He did not gasp, did not pale visibly, did not turn to stare. He kept dabbing the water. When he spoke again, his pleasant expression had not moved a muscle, and only the slight tremor under the words gave him away. "You are certain?" "I am holding it," I said. "Give the order to clear, make it about the spill, make it my fault. I will take the blame gladly." And Master Pell, anxious, fussy, ceremony-bound Master Pell, who I had privately thought for 19 years would be useless in a true crisis, straightened up, dropped the wet handkerchief on the ruined table with a theatrical little sigh, and turned to the room with the air of a man whose careful arrangements have been spoiled by a clumsy soldier, and said, in a voice pitched to carry and to disappoint, "Well, I am afraid this will not do." The room came to attention. Master Pell let the silence sit a beat. He was, I realized, rather good at this in his own fussy register. And then he gestured at the spilled water, the wet cables, the dripping edge of the table, with the wounded fastidiousness of a man surveying a catastrophe. "Water has reached the cabling," he announced, which was true, the cables being taped flat across the floor and the water having run to them. "I cannot in conscience seat Her Majesty in a room with live equipment standing in water. The risk is unacceptable. We will have to postpone." It was perfect, because it was unanswerable. No press team in the realm can argue with a palace chamberlain who has decided that the Queen's safety forbids them from proceeding. The young cameraman started to protest that the equipment was low voltage and perfectly safe, and Master Pell talked over him with the serene deafness of a man who has spent 20 years not hearing objections, saying that he was very sorry, that it was no one's fault, here a small reproachful glance at me, which I bore, that they would of course reschedule at the earliest convenience, and that in the meantime he must ask everyone to gather their equipment and withdraw to the green antechamber, while the room was made safe. The green antechamber. I had not told him to send them there, but it was exactly right, and I blessed his ceremonial instincts. The green antechamber is a holding room off the amber salon, with one door, no windows that open, and a guard's alcove beside it. To send the press team, there was to send them into a box I could lock politely, as a courtesy, while we made the room safe. And it gave me the thing I needed most, which was time, and the thing I needed second most, which was them all in one place, separated from the corridors and the gates and any chance to slip away or signal out. But it gave me a problem too, and I saw it the instant Master Pell named the room. If I let all 6 of them gather their equipment, the keeper would have his hands on the cart, and the cart held the receiver, and a clever caught man with 30 seconds at his own equipment can do a great deal of damage to the evidence inside it. I could not let him pack his own cart. So as the team began grumbling to coil their cables, I crossed to the technician's cart with the heavy apologetic tread of the guard who had caused all this, and I said, in my flat low voice, loud enough for the room, "I'll carry this. The least I can do," and I put my hand on the cart's handle. The technician moved to stop me. He could not help it, it was his cart, his receiver, his evidence, and every instinct in him screamed to keep my hands off it. "I've got it," he said quickly, reaching for the handle. "I'll manage." "I made the mess," I said, and I did not move my hand, and I looked at him, and I let my eyes do again the thing they had done before. "I have the device. I have you. Touch this cart and you make it a struggle, and a struggle is the one thing you cannot afford, because a struggle brings every eye, and every eye brings the question of why the sound man is fighting a guard over a cart. He heard all of it. His hand fell away from the handle. "I'll carry it to the antechamber for you," I said gently for the room, "so nothing else gets wet." And I wheeled it away from him, slow and careful, the receiver and its evidence under my own hand now, and he watched me take it and could do nothing, nothing at all. And that, more than the device in my glove, was the moment I knew I had won the room. Wren had the inner door. As the team filed toward the green antechamber, cables looped over shoulders and cameras cradled. faces ranging from honest disappointment to the technician's careful blankness to Elithmero's perfect composure. She had risen from her chair, smooth and unhurried, and gathered her unwritten notebook, and she walked toward the antechamber with the serenity of a woman who has decided that whatever has gone wrong, it is not her concern. As they filed, Wren counted them through the door with the pleasant blank efficiency of a man checking a list, and I wheeled the cart in behind them, and Master Pell followed, wringing his hands and apologizing, and then the door of the green antechamber closed, and Wren stood his post beside it, and the 6 of them were in the box. And in the corridor outside, the amber salon empty behind us, I opened my left hand at last. The device sat in my white glove, no bigger than a coat button, matte black, a thread of wire and a flat disk of battery. Small, ordinary, the kind of thing you would never look at twice. Master Pell stared at it as though I held a live coal. Merciful heaven, he breathed. In Her Majesty's room, under her own table. A foot from where her hands would have rested, I said. It transmits. The receiver is in that cart, which is now in the antechamber with the man who was monitoring it. We have, I think, between 2 and 10 minutes before someone outside this palace realizes the signal has gone dead and begins to wonder why, if there is someone outside, and I believe there is. So I must ask you 3 things, Master Pell, and I must ask them quickly. He pulled himself together. The crisis had oddly steadied him. Some men are like that, useless in calm, sharp in storm. Ask. First, Her Majesty must not enter the amber salon. Hold her. Tell her the interview is postponed for a technical fault, true enough. Do not yet tell her why. I do not want the news of this reaching the household through the wrong mouth before I know whose mouth is the wrong one. Done. She is in the blue library. I will send word she is not needed for the hour. Second, the captain of the watch must be told, quietly, that no one leaves the palace by any gate until I send word. Press team, household, deliveries, anyone. If there is a Confederate outside, I want him stranded on whichever side of the wall he is standing on. And if anyone tries to leave in a hurry in the next 10 minutes, I want their name. I will send a runner to Captain Dane myself. Third, and here I paused, because the third was the one that mattered most and the one I had the least right to ask. I need the press office's record of how this team was credentialed, every signature, who vetted the list, who issued the lanyards, who approved Elithmero's name. I need it before any of them know I am asking for it. Because that device, I closed my hand over it again, was placed by a hand inside this room, but it was let through the gate by a hand somewhere in this house, and I would very much like to know whose. Master Pell went still. He understood me. He understood exactly what I was saying, and he did not like it, and to his credit he did not flinch from it. You think it was one of ours, he said quietly. Someone in the household. I think someone who knew how our lanyards are made, I said, and how our lists are checked, and where a queen keeps her unguarded voice helped this through. That is not a stranger's knowledge, Master Pell. That is ours. And I will not pretend otherwise to spare anyone's feelings, including yours. He looked at me for a long moment, the thin, anxious chamberlain and the silent guard in the empty corridor, with the device between us. And then he nodded once, and there was something in it I had not seen in him before, not fear, not fuss, but the cold, straight resolve of a man who has served a house for 20 years and has just been told that the house has a worm in it, and has decided in the space of a breath that he would rather know than be spared. Get me the proof, he said, and I will get you every signature in that office and the heads of whoever's are on the wrong line, quietly. I promise you, quietly. But Vale, he caught my sleeve as I turned, a thing he had never once done in 19 years. Be certain. If you are right, this goes very high and very deep, and they will not go gently. And if you are wrong, I am holding it, I said again, and opened my glove a last time so he could see the small black thing that was no longer a feeling but a fact. I stopped being wrong 4 seconds after I knelt down. He let go of my sleeve. He went to find Captain Dane and to hold the Queen and to pull the credential records, and I stood a moment alone in the corridor, the empty salon on one side and the boxed press team on the other and the realm's secret in my fist, and I let myself feel, for exactly one breath, the size of what I had walked into. Then I put the feeling away, where feelings go on a post, and I went to do the patient, careful, unglamorous work of pulling on the thread until the whole of it came loose. The first thread was the card. I wheeled it not into the green antechamber with the team, but into the small guard's alcove beside that door, where Wren stood his post, and I left the alcove curtain open just enough that the technician, through the antechamber's inner window, could see me standing over his cart with my white gloves resting on its handle. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to spend the next quarter hour knowing that his receiver, his evidence, the one thing that could either hang him or save him, was under the hand of the guard who had taken his device, and that there was nothing he could do about it but sit in a box and sweat. Patience is a weapon. So is the appearance of patience to a man who has none left. I did not search the cart yet. That would come properly with witnesses, so that nothing I found could ever be called a thing I had planted. But I looked at it, looked the way I look at a room, and I learned three things standing still over it. The first, the receiver was real and it was good. Nestled among the legitimate recorders and cable spools was a flat black box with a single small dial and a port for headphones, and a tiny indicator light that, even now, glowed a steady, patient amber, a transmitter finder, still listening, still waiting for the dead device to speak again. Whoever had supplied this equipment had not bought it in a shop. It was the kind of thing that costs more than a sound technician earns in a year, and is not sold to broadsheet correspondents. It was, I thought, equipment from a service, an intelligence equipment, the kind a state or a wealthy private interest playing at being a state would issue to an agent. The plot grew a size colder in my mind. The second, tucked into a side pocket of the cart under a coil of cable, was a slim leather folio, and protruding from it was the corner of a sheet of paper that was not a cable list. I did not touch it, but I read what I could see of it, which was a column of figures, and at the head of the column 2 letters and a number, a notation, a reference, the kind of mark an organization puts on its own documents. 2 letters and a number. I committed them to memory. VR9. It meant nothing to me yet. It would. The third thing I learned was the most important, and I learned it by watching the antechamber window without seeming to. The 6 members of the press team had been put in a box together, and a box is a wonderful thing for a watcher, because people in a box arrange themselves by their true allegiances when they think no one is reading them. The young cameraman and the 2 cable assistants had clustered together near the far wall, talking in the low, offended murmur of honest workers whose day has been ruined by a clumsy guard and a fussy chamberlain checking their watches, complaining about the reschedule, entirely innocent in their irritation. They had no idea anything was wrong beyond a spilled carafe. They were not in the plot. I crossed them off in my mind with relief. I do not enjoy suspecting honest people, and there is always the risk, in a thing like this, of treating the whole for the sake of the few. The sound technician stood apart by the door, near where his cart had been taken from him, and he did not complain about the reschedule at all. A man whose only loss is a postponed appointment complains about the postponement. A man whose loss is something far larger has no attention to spare for the cover story. He stood silent, his face that careful blankness, his eyes going again and again to the alcove where I stood over his cart. He was in it to the neck. And Ilith Marrow sat alone in the single good chair the antechamber offered, her unwritten notebook closed on her knee, her hands folded, her composure absolute, and she was watching me too, but where the technician's watching was the watching of a trapped animal, hers was something else. Cooler, assessing. The watching of a player who has lost a hand and is already counting what is left in her purse. She was in it, but she was in it differently than he was. He was the hand that placed the device. She, I began to think, was something nearer the mind that had arranged for the hand to be in the room. 2 Confederates in the box then, plus the equipment that smelled of a service, plus the credential rot inside the house, plus, very probably, a Confederate outside the wall waiting on a signal that had gone dead. I had pulled one thread and 4 more had come loose with it. That is how these things go. The skill is not in finding threads. It is in not yanking them all at once and tangling the whole into a knot you can never undo. I needed to talk to the technician. Not to accuse him, accusation closes a man, but to open him, the way you open a reluctant door slowly on its own hinges. And I needed to talk to him before Eldermoor could, because the 2 of them in a box together would steady each other, and a steadied Confederate gives you nothing. I needed him alone, and a little frightened, and aware that I already knew enough that the only road left to him was the one I would offer. I sent Wren to fetch him. Wren did it beautifully. He opened the antechamber door and said, in his pleasant blank voice, that while the room was being made safe, the palace required a brief technical statement from the sound team about the equipment that had been near the water, for the household safety records, and would the sound engineer step into the alcove for a few minutes. It was a tedious, bureaucratic, entirely plausible request, and it isolated the 1 man I wanted without alarming the 5 I did not, and it gave the technician no honest grounds to refuse. He looked, for 1 instant, at Eldermoor, a flick of the eyes, asking her something, and she gave him nothing back, not a glance, not a flicker, which told me a great deal about which of them was the senior partner. Then he came, because there was nothing else he could do, and Wren closed the door behind him, and we 3 were alone in the alcove with his cart and his receiver, and in my glove, the small black thing that was the center of all of it. I did not begin with the device. I began with a chair. "Sit," I said, and gestured to the stool in the alcove, and my voice was the flat, even tone I use for everything, the tone that accuses no one and threatens no one, and simply states the shape of the world. He sat. He was sweating now lightly at the temples, though the alcove was cool. He had taken his dead headphones from around his neck at some point and they hung from his hand, and he kept turning them over, the way a man worries a thing when his hands need something to do. I set the device on the little table between us. I did not slam it down or brandish it. I placed it gently in the center of the table in the light where we could both look at it, and I let it sit there and I said nothing. Silence is the most underused tool in the world. People cannot bear it. They will fill it with anything, excuses, denials, confessions, rather than let it stand. I have ended interviews with silence that I could never have ended with questions. So I sat, and I looked at the small black device on the table, and I let the technician look at it, and I waited, and the alcove filled up with all the things he was not saying until the pressure of them grew too great for him to hold. "I want a lawyer," he said at last, which was the wrong thing to want, and we both knew it the moment he said it, because a man who has done nothing wrong asks what is going on, and a man who asks for a lawyer has just told you he knows exactly what is going on. "You may have one," I said mildly. "You are entitled to one, and no one will deny it to you, and when this is done you will have all the lawyers you can afford. But I am not the law, and this is not yet an arrest, and a lawyer cannot help you with the only thing I am offering you in this room, which is the difference between the man who placed the device and the man who chose too." He looked at me. "I don't follow." "Yes, you do," I said. "You followed it the moment you sat down. You are a sound engineer. A real one. I watched you set the legitimate microphone, and you set it like a craftsman, not like a man playing a part. You have a trade, and you are good at it, and somewhere along the way someone offered you money or pressed you with something to carry a small black device into the amber salon and fix it under a table and monitor what it heard. You are the hand. You are not the head. The head does not crouch under furniture. The head sends a craftsman to do it, because a craftsman knows how to make the wire lie flat and the adhesive hold. The head is sitting in that antechamber right now with her notebook on her knee, and she did not look at you when you went to her with your eyes a minute ago, and you felt that, didn't you, the cold of it? The head will not lift a finger to save the hand. The head never does. So the only question in this room, the only one that matters to you, is whether you would like to be the man who placed it, who goes down with the head and is forgotten, or the man who, when it came to it, chose to put it on the table. There is a great deal of distance between those two men. I am offering to let you walk it. I let that sit. I did not press. Pressing here would have undone it. The words had to do their own work in him, and they needed quiet to do it in. So I picked up the small device from the table, turned it once in my white glove so the light caught it, and set it down again, and I waited, and I watched a man's face come apart slowly along the seam of his own conscience. It took perhaps a full minute. A minute is a very long time to sit in silence with a guard and your own ruin between you on a table. And then he made a sound that was not quite a word, and put his face in his hands, the dead headphones clattering to the floor. And when he took his hands away, he was a different man, smaller and older, and I thought, in some way relieved. The way a man is relieved when a weight he has carried in secret is finally set down where another can see it. "It wasn't supposed to be the Queen," he said. I did not move. "Tell me." They told me it was a vetting, an internal thing. That there was a leak in the household, that someone close to the crown was selling state business to foreign buyers, and that the palace's own people couldn't be trusted to investigate because the rot was among them. And so a private inquiry had been retained, quietly, to catch the leak by recording the interview, because the leak would slip and say something. He was talking fast now, the words coming the way they come when a man has rehearsed a justification to himself so many times in the dark that it pours out whole. They said the device would only record the journalist and her contact in the room, that it was to catch a traitor, not to spy on the Queen. I wouldn't have. I have served the crown my whole working life. I would never. "You fixed it under the Queen's table," I said gently, "a foot from her hands. You monitored it in your headphones while she was due to sit there. Whatever they told you, you knew when you said it exactly whose voice it would gather." He was silent, then very low, "I knew." And there it was, not the whole truth, but a true thing, a real seam in him, and that is what you build on. Not the confession a man performs, but the one he is ashamed of. I leaned forward. "Who told you it was a vetting?" He hesitated, and I saw the old fear come up in him, the fear of the head, the one who would not save him, and I let it crest and recede, because a man must defeat that fear himself or the thing he gives you afterward is worthless. "I never met him," he said at last. Everything came through her. Marrow. But once when she briefed me in a coffee house by the river, there was a man at another table who I think was with her. He never spoke to me. But when we left, she stopped at his table and bent down and said 3 words to him, and I heard them because I was right behind her. She said, "The steward agrees." The steward. I kept my face still. It is the discipline of 19 years that I kept my face still. But inside me something went very cold and very clear, the way the air goes before snow. Eldermoor's royal household has a steward of the inner court. He is one of the 3 highest officers below the crown itself. He controls the household's accounts, its appointments, its access. He vets the lists. He knows how the lanyards are made and who issues them. He knows where a queen keeps her unguarded voice, because it is his business to know everything about the Queen's days, the better to arrange them. If there was a hand inside the house that had let this through the gate, that had gotten Ilith Marrow's name onto a list vetted 3 times and slid a credential past every check. There was exactly 1 officer in the palace with the reach to do it cleanly, and the technician had just put the man's title in the middle of the table next to the device. The steward of the inner court, Lord Bram Holloway, a heavy, genial, deeply trusted man who had served the household for 30 years and who had, only last week, stood at the Queen's right hand at the spring assembly and been praised by her, in front of the whole court, as the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor. If the technician was telling the truth, the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor had reached under the Queen's own table. This was the moment the game changed. Up to now I had been chasing a device and the people who placed it, a clean, containable thing, a press team and a hidden mic, the sort of plot a guard can take apart in an afternoon and a court can punish without much shaking. But the steward agrees turned a containable thing into something else entirely. It meant the rot was not at the gate but at the heart. It meant that the proof Master Pell was even now pulling from the press office. The signatures, the credential record would lead, if I followed it honestly, straight up to one of the 3 highest officers of the crown, a man the Queen trusted above almost any other, a man who would not, when cornered, go gently, and who had the whole machinery of the household at his hand to fight with or to hide behind. And it meant something colder still. If the steward had arranged this, then the device under the table had never really been for a scoop, or even for a foreign buyer. It had been for the steward. A man does not spy on his own queen to sell her words abroad and stop there. He spies on her to no her, to know what she knows, what she suspects, who she trusts, what she might be about to do, and a man wants that knowledge for one reason above all others. He wants it because he is afraid of her. He wants it because he is doing something she must not discover, and he needs to hear it the moment she begins to. The steward was not gathering the Queen's voice to sell it. He was gathering it to stay one step ahead of her, which meant that somewhere in the household, the steward of the inner court was already doing a thing that would ruin him if the Queen learned of it, and the device under the table was not the plot. It was the steward's early warning bell, his ear at the door, placed so that he would hear the footstep of his own discovery before it reached him. I had not uncovered a leak. I had stumbled onto the edge of whatever the steward was so afraid the Queen would find, and the device had been his way of making sure she never did. I looked at the small black thing on the table, no bigger than a coat button, and I understood that I had been wrong about its size all morning. It was not the center of the plot. It was the smallest visible corner of something I could not yet see the shape of, and the rest of it ran back, through a borrowed lanyard and a forged credential and a coffee house by the river, into the highest rooms of the house I had given 19 years to guard. "You have walked the distance," I said quietly to the technician, who was watching me with the desperate hope of a man who has thrown his only stone and is waiting to hear it land. "You chose to put it on the table. I will see that it is remembered that you did." And I meant it, and he heard that I meant it, and something in his shoulders let go. But I did not feel the relief of a thing solved. I felt the weight of a thing only just begun. Because I knew now whose name was at the top of the thread, and I knew that to pull it the rest of the way, I would have to do the hardest thing my discipline had ever asked of me. I would have to stand, quiet and certain and alone, against the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor, in his own house, with nothing in my own but a button-sized device and the truth. Master Pell came to the alcove a quarter-hour later, and he came changed. He had gone out to find Captain Dane and hold the Queen and pull the credential record, and he had done all 3, and the doing of the 3rd had aged him. He carried a thin folder against his chest the way a man carries something he wishes were not his to hold, and his face, when Wren let him in and the curtain fell behind him, was the gray of a man who has looked at a thing and cannot now unlook at it. He glanced at the technician, and I gave Wren the nod to take the man back to the antechamber, gently, with a chair and water, separated from the others, a witness now and not a suspect, and when we 2 were alone, Master Pell sat down heavily on the stool and set the folder on the little table next to the device, and for a moment he did not speak at all. "Tell me," I said. "The gates are sealed," he said. "Dane has it in hand, nothing leaves until you say." "The Queen is in the blue library and content to be." I told her the equipment failed, which was no lie, and I pulled the credential record. He put one thin finger on the folder but did not open it. "Vale. I have run this household's papers for 20 years. I know every hand that signs every line, and I will tell you what I found, and then I will tell you that I did not want to find it." He opened the folder. The press team's credentials had been requested, as they always are, by the palace press office on a standard form a week before the event. The form listed all 6 names, with their employers and their reference numbers, and it bore the press secretary's signature at the bottom, all correct, all in order, exactly as it should be. But Master Pell turned that page over and showed me the back, and the carbon beneath it, and the small thing that a man who did not know the household's papers would never have seen. 5 of the 6 names came up through the ordinary channel, he said. Requested by the broadsheet, checked by the press office, confirmed against the broadsheet's own staff roll. 5 honest names. But the 6th, his finger found a faint mark in the margin, an initialed notation beside Ilith Marrow's name. The 6th was added, after the form was first drawn up. You can see it. The ink sits differently, and the reference number is out of sequence with the others. It was assigned later by hand, not by the office's running ledger. Someone took a closed, approved list and opened it again, and inserted a name and reclosed it, and initialed the insertion with the one mark that lets such a thing pass every later check without a question being raised, because that mark is the household's highest authority over access, and no clerk alive would query it. Whose mark? I said, though I already knew. Master Pell looked at me, and his voice when it came was very quiet and very steady. The steward of the inner court, Lord Holloway, his initials, his authority, his hand. He inserted Ilith Marrow onto a vetted list and signed her through every gate in the palace. So the technician's asterisk, the steward agrees asterisk, was no longer the half-heard word of a frightened man in a coffee house. It was ink. It was the household's own paper, in the household's own folder, initialed by the household's own highest officer. I had the hand, the device in my glove. I had the head's instrument, Ilith Marrow, in the box. And now I had the line that ran from her up to the man at the top, written in his own authority, where no later check would ever have caught it because his authority was the thing the checks were built to trust. It was, I thought, the perfect crime of a man who has spent 30 years learning exactly which doors a household leaves unlocked for its most trusted servant. He had not broken in. He had not forged a stranger's hand. He had simply used his own, used the trust itself as the key, because who in all of Eldermoor would ever audit the steward of the inner court? A guard would, a guard who knelt in spilled water and felt a button under a table, but only because the guard had stumbled, by the grace of a clumsy hand and a careful eye, onto the one corner of it that showed. There is more, Master Pell said, and he said it the way a man says a thing he has been dreading to say. While the press office pulled the record, I sent a quiet word to the household treasury. You asked, in the corridor, about the figures, the asterisk charitable asterisk payments, the talk of buyers. I have heard that talk too this past half year. We all have, the way you hear a draft in an old house and cannot find the window. I did not connect it to the steward. One does not. But you set me looking, and I looked, and he pulled a second sheet from the folder, a column of figures, and I saw at once the notation at its head, the 2 letters and a number I had read upside down in the cart, the mark I had committed to memory. VR9. Vorel reached 9, Master Pell said. A holding. A company registered abroad that has, over the past year, received 4 payments from a household account that the steward administers, the Crown's discretionary fund for grants and patronage, which he alone signs against and which no one else reviews. The payments are dressed as charitable disbursements. They are large. And Vorel reached 9 when I had it looked into just now by a clerk I would trust with my life, does no charity of any kind. It is a shell, a name and an account and nothing else. And the only thing it appears to do is move money quietly between the household's discretionary fund and somewhere I cannot yet see. I looked at the figures, and then at the device, and the whole of it came together in my mind with the soft, terrible click of a lock turning. The steward had been moving the Crown's money, the Queen's own discretionary fund, the one she trusted him to administer for grants and good works, out through a shell company, into his own reach or that of whoever stood behind Vorel Reach 9. For a year. large sums quietly under cover of his trust. And somewhere in this difficult winter, the grain shortages, the floods, the tax dispute, the broadsheets shouting about where the crown's coin had gone, the Queen had begun, I now understood, to ask questions about the household's accounts. Not loudly, not yet as an accusation, but she had begun to look, the way a careful queen looks when the realm is short of money and the books do not quite sing. And the steward had felt her looking. A man with his hand in the crown's purse feels the crown's eye the way a thief feels a torch swing toward the corner where he crouches. He needed to know how much she knew. He needed to hear her unguarded voice, what she suspected, whom she had asked to look, how close she was, and he needed to hear it before she said it to anyone who could act. So he had reached for the one occasion when the Queen would sit, relaxed, in a private room, and talk for an hour in her own voice about the state of the realm, her gesture of openness, her press interview. The very thing meant to show the people she had nothing to hide had been turned, by the steward, into the instrument by which he hoped to learn what he needed to hide. The device had never been about a journalist's scoop. Ilith Marrow and her broadsheet were the costume the plot wore. The device was the steward's ear, placed under the Queen's table so that he could hear his own discovery coming and run, or bury the trail, or worse, before she ever caught him. "He is stealing from the crown," I said slowly to Master Pell, and the Queen had begun to suspect it, and the device was his way of hearing exactly how much she knew, so that he could stay ahead of her. The mic was not the crime. The mic was the alarm bell he set to warn himself of the crime being found. Master Pell had gone very still. "If that is true," he said, "then he is not merely a thief. He is a thief who knew the Queen was closing on him and who chose, rather than confess or flee, to plant himself an ear inside her private counsels. That is not a man who will surrender quietly when a guard knocks on his door veil. That is a man with a year's stolen money behind him, the household's machinery in his hands, and everything to lose. He will have planned for this. Men like him always have a second door." He was right, of course, and it was at that exact moment, as if the house itself wished to prove him right, that Wren put his head through the alcove curtain, and his pleasant blank face was not quite as blank as usual, and he said, "Lo, Corwin, the steward of the inner court is in the antechamber corridor. He has come down himself. He says he has heard there was an incident at the press event, and he has come to see that the press team are treated with every courtesy, and he is asking, very pleasantly, to speak with the woman Marrow. Alone." The head had come for his instrument. He had felt the silence too, the dead signal, the device gone dark, and where the technician had sweated in a box, the steward of the inner court had done the bold thing, the thing only a man certain of his own untouchability would dare. He had walked down, in person, genial and unhurried, to take command of the situation under the cover of his rank, to reach Ilith Marrow before any guard could, and to manage the whole quiet catastrophe back into a spilled carafe and a postponed appointment, the way he had managed everything in this household for 30 years. I looked at Master Pell. I looked at the device in my glove and the figures on the table and the line of ink that ran up to the highest officer of the crown. And I understood that the patient, careful unraveling I had planned, thread by thread, witness by witness, all of it neat and contained, had just run out of time, because the man at the top of the thread had decided to walk into the room and pull it back his way. I had a choice to make in the next 10 seconds, and it was the oldest choice of my post, whether to stand aside for a man who outranked every soul in the palace but the Queen, or to stand my ground and refuse him, quietly, by the book, with nothing behind me but the truth and a button under my glove, and let him understand that there was, in this house, one door even the steward of the inner court could not open. "Wren," I said, "do not let him into the antechamber. Be courteous, be sorry. But do not let him pass." Wren's eyebrows did not move, which is how I knew he understood the size of what I had just asked of him. "He will order me." "Yes," I said, "he will, and you will not move. And when he asks who gave you such an order, I straightened my coat, and I felt the old cold clarity settle over me, the one that comes when a post stops being ordinary and becomes the one you will be measured by for the rest of your life. You will tell him the order came from me, and then you will send him to me. The steward of the inner court came to the alcove with a smile already on his face. He was a large man, Lord Bram Holloway, broad through the shoulders and gone comfortable in the middle, with a wide pleasant face and the easy warmth of a man who has been liked all his life and has learned to use the liking. He wore the dark robe of his office with its chain of silver links, and he moved the way powerful men move in their own houses, slowly, taking up room, certain of his welcome. He filled the little alcove when he stepped into it, and he looked from me to Master Pell to the device on the table and back to me, and his smile did not so much as flicker, and I understood that I was dealing with a man of formidable nerve, which I had expected, and formidable charm, which is always the more dangerous of the two. "Vale, isn't it?" he said warmly, as though we were meeting at a garden party. "Corwin Vale, I know your name. The Queen knows it too. She has said more than once that you are the steadiest man on the posts. High praise from her." He let that hang a moment, the flattery laid down gently like a coin on a table. "And Master Pell, what a tangle we have here. A spilled carafe, a postponed interview, a press team cooling their heels in the antechamber, and his eyes went to the device and lingered and came up unbothered. And this? What is this, gentlemen? It looks rather like a listening device." "It is," I said. "How extraordinary." He shook his head slowly, a man marveling at the wickedness of the world. "In the amber salon, under the Queen's table, I'm told. Well, this is precisely why I came down the moment I heard there'd been trouble. These press people, you cannot trust them. They will do anything for a story, anything, and now look. A planted device. A clear breach. This will have to be handled very carefully, very quietly, for the Crown's sake. A scandal of this kind in the broadsheets would do untold harm to Her Majesty standing at exactly the moment she can least afford it." He turned the full warmth of his attention on me, and his voice dropped into the register of confidence, of one trusted servant to another. "You've done remarkable work, Vale, truly. You've caught a serious thing. Now let me take it from here. I'll have the woman dealt with discreetly, the team released with a firm word, the device disposed of, and not a whisper of it reaches the press. The Queen never need be troubled by it at all. You'll have my personal commendation and the Queen's, I'll see to that. You may return to your post with the thanks of the Crown." And there it was, the false dawn, the reasonable, generous, entirely poisoned middle road offered by a master of offering it. I want to be honest about how good it was, because the whole worth of what I did next lies in how nearly I might not have done it. He had not denied a thing. He had not blustered or threatened. That would have been the move of a smaller man and would have warned me. He had done something far cleverer. He had taken the truth I held and folded it, gently, into a story in which he was the hero and I was the loyal soldier who had served him well. And he had offered me, in that story, everything a man in my position could want. The Queen's thanks, the steward's favor, a serious thing caught and quietly handled, no scandal, no trouble, my post and my honor intact. All I had to do was hand him the device and walk away, and let him deal with the woman discreetly, which is to say, let him reach Ilith Marrow, his own instrument, and silence the one mouth that could name him, and bury the trail, and disappear the figures, and go on being the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor, while the Queen he was robbing thanked the guard who had handed her thief the very evidence that would have hanged him. It was the perfect trap, because it asked me to do the easy, flattering, reasonable thing and dress the doing of it as duty. And I will tell you that for the length of one breath, it pulled at me. Not the flattery. Flattery slides off a man who has stood enough posts. What pulled was the asterisk reasonableness. He was the steward of the inner court. He outranked everyone in the palace but the Queen. He was right that a scandal would harm her. He was offering to handle a genuine breach quietly, which is a thing the Crown genuinely needs. And I was a guard, with a button in my glove and a feeling that had become a folder, standing against one of the three highest officers of the realm on the strength of an upside-down notation and a frightened technician's half-heard sentence. Who was I to refuse the steward? What if I was wrong about the figures? What if the VR9 had an innocent answer, and I tore down the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor on a guard's suspicion? The reasonable man hands him the device. The reasonable man takes the commendation and goes back to his post and lets his betters sort out their own affairs. The reasonable man does not stand, alone, against the crown's highest officer in the crown's own house. But I have learned in 19 years that the reasonable thing and the right thing wear the same coat exactly often enough to ruin a man who cannot tell them apart in the dark. And the test was simple in the end. Once I held it up against the light. A man with nothing to hide does not need the evidence handed to asterisk him. He sends it up. An innocent steward, hearing that a device had been found under the Queen's table, would have said, "Take it at once to the captain of the watch and to Her Majesty's own council. Let it be examined openly. I will not touch it, lest anyone ever say the household interfered." That is what trust does when it is real. It makes itself accountable. Only a guilty man asks to take the evidence into his own keeping and dispose of it quietly. Only a guilty man offers to deal with the woman himself. He had told me everything I needed to know, not by what he hid, but by what he reached for. So I did not hand him the device. I closed my white glove around it, and I looked the steward of the inner court full in his wide, pleasant face, and I said, in the flat, even voice I keep for the worst moments, the voice that accuses no one and refuses everything, "No, my lord." The smile held, but something behind it went still. "I beg your pardon. This device and the receiver in that cart and the woman in that antechamber and the credential record Master Pell is holding are now matters of the Queen's security. They will go, untouched and unaltered, to the captain of the watch and to Her Majesty's own council, and to no one else. I will not hand them to any officer of the household, however high, not to Master Pell, not to the captain even, until Her Majesty's council is present to witness it, and not, my lord, with respect to you. No one touches this evidence outside the Queen's own sight. That is not an accusation. It is the only way to be sure that no one can ever say it was tampered with. You will understand, my lord, that a thing this serious must be kept perfectly clean." I watched the offer die in his face, and I watched him reach for the next tool, which was the one I had known he would reach for the moment the warmth failed. "Guard," he said, and the genial warmth was gone now, replaced by the flat, hard authority of a man who has given 10,000 orders and never once been refused. "I am the steward of the inner court. I command the household. I am giving you a direct order. Hand me that device and stand aside and let me speak to the woman. Now." This is the moment the niche I serve was made for, though no one who writes ballads about the guard ever puts it quite right. They imagine it is a moment of defiance, chin up, voice raised, the brave soldier hurling the order back. It is not. It is the opposite. It is a moment of perfect, weightless stillness, in which a man who could obey, who has spent his whole life obeying, who feels the full pull of 30 years of rank bearing down on him, simply does not. Not in anger, not in pride, in the quiet certainty that there is one authority in this house higher than the steward, and he serves it, and it is not standing in this alcove. "My lord," I said, and I did not raise my voice at all, and I did not move, "you command the household. You do not command the Queen's security, and you do not command me when the Queen's security is what stands between us. I serve the crown. The device goes to the Queen's council, untouched. If you wish it otherwise, you may take the matter to Her Majesty herself, and I will carry the device to her with my own hands and lay it at her feet, and she may give me any order she chooses, and I will obey it. But until she does, I will not move, and you will not pass, and this evidence will not leave my glove. That is my post, my lord. I am sorry. I will not give it up." For a long moment the steward of the inner court looked at me, and I saw, behind the wide, pleasant face, the whole machine of him working, measuring, the way Marrow had measured the room that morning, looking for the door. He could not order me through. He could not charm me aside. He could not take the device by force, not with Wren at the curtain and the captain's men sealing the gates and Master Pell standing witness. And he could not go to the Queen, because the one thing the steward of the inner court could not do, now or ever, was stand in front of Queen Saralind and explain why his own initials were on the credential of a woman who had smuggled a listening device under her table. I had not raised my voice. I had not lifted a hand. I had simply refused to move, and in refusing, I had closed the last door of a house he had thought he owned. And I watched him understand it. I watched the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor realize that they had finally reached a thing they could not grasp. Which is exactly when he stopped trying to grasp it, and reached instead for the second door Master Pell had warned me of, the one a man like Holloway always keeps open behind him. The change in him was a thing to see. The warmth was gone, and now the authority went too, set down like a tool that had failed, and what was left underneath was simply a man calculating his escape, and a clever one. He let his shoulders ease. He let a small rueful smile come back, a different smile now, the smile of a man conceding a point with grace. "You're a careful man, Vale," he said. "Too careful, perhaps, for your own good, but the Queen is fortunate in you, and I'll not pretend otherwise." "Very well, you're quite right. The evidence should go to Her Majesty's Council untouched. I overstepped. This whole business has rattled me. I'll leave you to your duty." And he turned, easy and unhurried, as if to go, and I knew, with absolute certainty, what he was going to do the instant he was out of the alcove and out of my sight. He was going to walk, calm and genial, through his own household, past guards who would bow to the steward of the inner court and never dream of stopping him, to whatever quiet office held the rest of the Vorel Reach papers, and he was going to burn them. And then he was going to find one of the gates that a man of his rank could open with a word, sealed or not, and he was going to be gone abroad, to wherever the stolen money had been waiting for him all along, a fat and genial man who had simply decided to take an early retirement, and he would leave behind him a button-sized device, a frightened technician, a journalist who could name a title but not a crime, and a guard with a folder of suspicions and no thief to pin them to. The evidence in my glove would convict Marrow. It would never, once the papers burned and the man was over the water, convict the steward. He would walk out of his own ruin the way he had walked into the alcove, certain of his welcome, unhurried, untouchable. The reasonable man lets him go. I have made the point already, and I will not labor it, except to say that everything in my training said that my post was the alcove and the evidence, and that pursuing the steward through the palace was not a guard's place, and that if I was wrong I would have laid hands on the crown's highest officer on the strength of a hunch about a folio. The reasonable man stands in the alcove and guards the device, and lets his betters and the law sort out the man. But I had stopped, an hour ago, being only the guard of a place. The moment I peeled that button off the underside of the Queen's table, I had become the guard of a truth, and a truth has no walls. You cannot stand a post at its door. You can only refuse to let it get away. So I did the second unreasonable thing of the morning, and it was harder than the first, because the first had only required me to stand still. "My lord," I said to his back in the same flat voice, "you'll forgive me, but no one leaves the palace this morning. The gates are sealed by order of the captain of the watch at my request until the Queen's security is satisfied. That order includes the household. It includes the press team, and I am sorry to say, my lord, that it includes you." He stopped. He did not turn at once. And when he did turn, the last mask was gone, and I saw the man as he truly was, not genial, not warm, not even angry, but cold and quick and frightened underneath in the particular way of a man who has staked everything on never being stopped and has, for the first time in 30 years, been stopped. "You would seal asterisk me in," he said softly. On whose authority does a guard seal the steward of the inner court inside his own house? On no authority of mine, my lord, I said. On the Queen's. Her security is sealed until her council examines what I hold. You are part of what must be examined. Your initials are on the credential, my lord. Master Pell has the record in his hand and the figures for Voral reach beside it. I make no accusation. I am not the law and I am not your judge. But I will not let any person who is named in this evidence leave the Queen's house before the Queen's council has seen it. That is not a thing I do to you. It is a thing I would do to anyone, to Master Pell, to the captain, to myself, if my name were on that page. The rule does not bend for rank. If it bent for rank, it would be worthless, because it is precisely the high and trusted who can do the great harm. You taught the household that yourself, my lord, every time you said no one was above the audit. I am only saying it back to you. It was, I think, the no one is above the audit that broke him, his own words, his own polished principle, turned in his own hand. For one terrible moment I thought he might rush me. A cornered man of his size in a small alcove is not nothing, and I am past 50 and slower than I was. My weight settled. Wren, at the curtain, shifted to his left foot, but the steward did not rush. Men who fight with charm and rank do not, as a rule, know how to fight with their hands, and he knew it of himself. What he did instead was the last move left to a man who cannot pass and cannot fight. He tried, one final time, to be too big to stop. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he said, and now the voice rose just slightly, the first crack in 30 years of smooth. "I have served this house since before you wore that coat. I have stood at the Queen's right hand. I have the ear of every officer of state in Eldermoor. If you detain me, on the word of a bribed sound engineer and a guard's fancy about a column of figures, I will see you broken for it. Not dismissed. Broken. Your name, your 19 years, your pension, your honor gone, and I will make certain every door in this realm is closed to you, and you will end your days wondering why you threw away a good life to play at being the law. I am offering you one last time the wise road. Stand aside. Let me pass. And none of this ever happened to either of us. And I will tell you the truth. It was not an empty threat. He could very likely have done it, or much of it. A guard who detains the steward of the inner court and is wrong does not survive it, and a guard who detains him and is right does not always survive it either, because the high places of any house close ranks around their own. I stood there with my career in one pan of the scale and a button in the other, and I knew the weight of each exactly. "My lord," I said, "I have stood the Queen's posts for 19 years, and in all that time I have understood my honor to be a very simple thing. It is not my pension. It is not my name in anyone's mouth. It is whether, on the morning a wrong came into the Queen's house, I stood between it and her, or stepped aside and let it pass for the sake of a quiet life. You are offering me the quiet life. I am refusing it. Not because I am brave, I am frightened of you, my lord. I would be a fool not to be, but because the day I let the size of a man decide whether the rule touches him is the day I stop being a guard and become only a coat. You will not pass. The gates are sealed, and the Queen's council is, I expect, already on the way." He had no answer to that. There is no answer to it, which is why the powerful hate it so. And in the silence that followed I heard, from the corridor beyond Wren, the sound I had been counting on Master Pell to make happen, the brisk measured tread of men with purpose, more than one, and Captain Dane's voice, low and clipped, and another voice with them, dry and precise, that I knew to be the Queen's own counsel, the Lord Justiciar's deputy, a man whose entire profession was the examining of evidence and the unmaking of clever men. The steward heard it too, and I watched the last of the calculation go out of his face, and what replaced it was not the genial mask and not the cold fright, but simply emptiness. The slack gray emptiness of a man who has run every door in a house he thought he owned and found them all, at the last, held shut by a single guard who would not move. Captain Dane came through the curtain first, broad and grim, with two of the watch behind him, and behind them the Lord Justiciar's deputy, a spare dry man named Corin Adele with spectacles and a leather case, and the unhurried manner of someone who has watched a great many powerful men try to talk their way out of the truth, and has never once been impressed by it. He took in the alcove at a glance, the device on the table, the folder in Master Pell's hands, the steward gone gray against the paneling, the guard who would not move, and he set his case down on the little table beside the device, and he said to me, "You are Vale. Master Pell's runner told me the shape of it on the stair. You have evidence you have refused to release except into the Queen's counsel's keeping, examined openly." "Yes, sir," I said. "It has not left my glove since I took it. It has not been touched, altered, or out of my sight. I would not give it to any officer of the household, not because I distrust them, but because the surest way to keep a thing clean is to let no one near it whom it might one day accuse. I give it to you now, sir, in front of these witnesses, exactly as it came off the underside of Her Majesty's table." And I opened my white glove, there in the lamplight, in front of the captain and the deputy and Master Pell and the watch, and I laid the small black device into the deputy's waiting hand, and he took it with a pair of fine tweezers from his case and held it up to the light and turned it once, and his dry face did not change at all, which is, in a man like that, the very loudest thing it can do. "A transmitter," he said, "adhesive backing, a service pattern, not a commercial one. I have seen its like exactly twice, and both times it belonged to people who should not have had it." He set it carefully in a small lined box. "And the receiver?" "In that cart, sir. Monitored until I took the device, by the sound engineer now sitting under guard in the antechamber, who has given a full account freely of how he was recruited, what he was told, and the one name he overheard. Master Pell holds the credential record, which shows the journalist Marrow inserted onto a vetted list by hand, after the list was closed, under the initialed authority of I did not look at the steward. I did not need to. I only said it flat and plain into the room, the steward of the inner court. And beside it, the figures for a shell holding, Vorel Reach 9, that has been receiving payments from the Crown's discretionary fund for a year, under the steward's sole signature, dressed as charity and doing none. The deputy turned slowly and looked at Lord Holloway for the first time, over the tops of his spectacles, with the mild, terrible attention of a man who has just been handed the end of a thread and intends to follow it all the way to wherever it goes. "Is that so?" he said. It was not a question. The steward opened his mouth, and then he closed it, because there is a point past which a clever man understands that every word he says will be written down and read back to him, and that his cleverness, which has been his armor all his life, has become the rope. He said nothing. He said nothing as the deputy directed Captain Dane to take him, courteously and without force, to a guarded room to await the Queen's pleasure and a formal examination of the household accounts. He said nothing as the watch closed around him, gently, for he did not resist. The fight had gone out of him the moment the gates were sealed and the truth had a witness. He paused once at the curtain and looked back at me, and I thought he might make a last threat or a last appeal or simply curse me. He did none of those. He looked at me for a long moment, the genial mask entirely gone, and what he said, very quietly, was the only honest thing I ever heard him say. "You could have had everything," he said. "I offered you everything." "You offered me a quiet life, my lord," I said. "I already have one. I stand still and I watch, it suits me." And they took him away. It was perhaps an hour later that the Queen sent for me. I had expected to be sent back to my post, or to be questioned by the deputy, for the thought of the steward's threat had not left me, and a man does not shed 19 years' worth of caution about the high places in a single morning, to begin the slow, uncertain business of discovering whether I had ruined myself by being right. Instead, Master Pell came to find me where I stood in the corridor outside the now empty alcove, and his thin, anxious face had something in it I had never seen there before, a kind of shy pride, and he said, "Her Majesty asks for you. In the Blue Library, now." I will not pretend I went without my heart in my throat. I have stood the Queen's posts for 19 years, and I have rarely been within speaking distance of her, and never once for a thing like this. I went down the long gallery in my red coat with my bearskin under my arm, and I was let into the Blue Library, which is a quiet, warm room lined floor to ceiling with books and smelling of leather and wood smoke. And Queen Saralind was standing by the window with the spring light on her, and she turned when I came in, and she looked at me for a moment in silence. She is not a tall woman, the Queen, nor a loud one. Everything about her is quiet and warm and steady, which is exactly why a man like Holloway had feared her so. She was the kind of ruler who does not shout but does not forget, who asks her gentle questions and then quietly looks, and whom you cannot fool twice. The deputy had told her everything, I learned later. Master Pell, too. She knew by the time I came into the Blue Library the whole shape of what had been done in her house, and the whole shape of what one guard had done about it. "Corwin Vale," she said, 19 years on my posts, and I have spoken perhaps a dozen words to you in all that time. That is a failing in me, not in you. The steadiest man on the posts, I have always said, and I said it without knowing the half of what I meant. She came toward me, away from the window, and she was not smiling exactly, but there was something in her face that was warmer than a smile and harder to bear. "They tell me you knelt in spilled water and took a thing off the underside of my table that no one else in the room had seen. They tell me you refused to hand it to the highest officer of my household, and refused his orders, and refused his threats, and stood in a corridor and would not let him pass, knowing what he could do to you. They tell me you did all of it without raising your voice or your hand, and that when it was done, you laid the proof in my counsel's hand untouched, and said you would have done the same if your own name had been on the page." She stopped a pace from me. "Is that true, what they tell me?" "It is true that I would have done the same if my name had been on the page, ma'am," I said. "That is the only part that matters. The rule is worth nothing if it bends for the high. It is worth less than nothing, in fact, because the high are the ones who can do the great harm. I only held the rule where it was supposed to be held. Any guard would have." "No," she said gently and with great certainty, "not any guard. Most men offered everything by a man who could break them, find a reason to call the easy road the wise one. You found a reason not to. That is rarer than courage, Vale. Courage is loud and quick. What you did was quiet and slow and took the whole morning, and at every turn you could have stopped and been thanked for it, and you did not stop. That is not bravery. That is honor, the kind that no one is watching and no one will ballad, the kind that is only ever a man, alone, choosing the harder true thing over the easier false one again and again until the thing is done." She paused. "Holloway threatened to break you, to close every door in the realm to you," he said. "He did, ma'am." "He will find," said Queen Saralind, and now there was steel under the warmth, the steel that had frightened a thief into planting an ear under her table, "that the only doors closing in this realm will be the ones closing on him. You will not be broken, Corwin Vale. You will be raised. Not for show, I know you would hate the show, and I will spare you most of it, but because a house that does not honor the man who guards its honor does not deserve to keep it. There will be a place for you wherever in my service you wish it, and a pension that no one can touch, and my own word written and sealed, that on the morning a wrong came into my house, you stood between it and me and would not move. Keep that word. Show it to anyone who ever doubts you, and know that it is the truest thing I have ever set my name to." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the only thing I knew, which was the truth. "I would rather have my post back, ma'am, than any raising. I am good at the post. I am not sure I would be good at anything else." And Queen Saralind laughed, a real laugh, soft and surprised, and said that I should have exactly that then, and the pension and the sealed word besides, and that the realm was fortunate beyond its deserving to have a man who, offered the world, asked only to go back to standing still by a door. and she dismissed me kindly, and I went back to my post, and that very nearly is the end of it. But there are threads I promised to tie, and a guard who leaves threads loose has not finished his work. The technician, his name was Wren, and I had been right that he was a true craftsman ruined by a lie, kept the distance he had walked. Because he had chosen in the alcove to put the device on the table, and because he gave the deputy a full and honest account that became the spine of the whole case, the Queen's Council marked him not as a conspirator but as a witness who had been deceived and had repented in time. He was not imprisoned. He lost his standing with the broadsheet, which is no small thing to a craftsman, but he kept his liberty and, I am told, found honest work in time, mending instruments rather than planting them, and he sent me a year later through Master Pell a short unsigned note that said only, "Thank you for the door. I have not stopped being grateful that you let me find it. I keep it." A guard learns that the people he catches are not always his enemies. Sometimes they are only people who took a wrong turning in the dark and needed someone to hold a lamp at the right fork. Ilith Marrow, that was not, of course, her name. The woman who sat with the unwritten notebook was an agent, retained through 3 layers of deniability, so that the trail, had it gone the way the steward planned, would have ended at a broadsheet correspondent and never reached him. She was the head's hand in the room, but she was not the head. The head had been Holloway all along, with Vorel Reach behind him, and behind that a foreign buyer who had been paying, through the shell, for exactly the kind of access to the Crown's private deliberations that a listening device under the Queen's table would provide. The deputy unmade her cover patiently, the way he unmade everything, and when it came apart she said very little, being a professional, but it did not matter by then. The credential record, the figures, the device, Wren's account, and the steward's own gray silence had built a thing that needed no confession from her to stand. And the steward, Lord Bram Holloway, the surest pair of hands in Eldermoor, the man who had said no one was above the audit, was audited at last. Every account he had ever signed against, every payment to Vorel Reach, every quiet patronage that turned out to be a pipe carrying the Crown's coin out of the realm. It came to a great deal. The Queen did not make a public spectacle of it. She is not that kind of ruler, and a spectacle would have done the harm to the Crown's standing that Holloway himself had warned against, which was the one true thing in everything he ever told me. But he was stripped of his office and his chain and his place, and the stolen money was traced and clawed back to the last coin it could be, and he ended his days not over the water with a fortune, as he had planned, but quietly confined, a fat genial man with nothing left to be genial about, who had reached under his Queen's table and found, instead of the warning he wanted, a guard's white glove already there. The interview that had been so abruptly cancelled was held in the end, 3 weeks later, in the same amber salon, with the same honest 5 of the press team. The new 6th a correspondent vetted 4 times instead of 3, and a low table that I myself walked under, on my knees, with a lamp, before anyone was let into the room. The Queen sat in her chair and spoke in her own voice about the difficult winter, the grain and the bridges and the tax, and answered every hard question put to her. And the broadsheets the next morning said it was the most open thing a Crown had done in living memory, and they were right, and not one of them ever knew how nearly the openness had been turned into a knife. I stood my post against the wall that second morning, a red coat and a tall hat and a pair of white gloves, furniture to every eye in the room, and I watched the Queen speak, and when the interview was done and the lights came down she caught my eye across the salon, only for a moment, only the smallest tilt of her head, and I understood it, the way Wren and I understand each other, in the silent grammar of people who have stood together in a serious hour. "I see you," it said. "I know what you are." "Thank you." I gave her nothing back that anyone could have seen. A guard does not. But I have carried that small tilt of her head for the rest of my service, longer than any medal, and I will tell you what it taught me, because it is the only lesson I have ever been certain of. People think the power of my post is the rifle, or the order I can give, or the gate I can shut. It is not. The power of my post is restraint, the strength to not move, to not speak, to not strike, to not take the easy thanks, to not hand the device to the great man, to not call the wise road the right one, to stand still and watch and hold the rule exactly where it is supposed to be held, no matter whose face is on the other side of it. Anyone can act. The whole world is full of people acting. The rarer thing, the harder thing, the thing the crown actually needs from the man by the door, is a person who will wait, who will see the small wrong thing and not warn it, who will hold the truth in a closed glove until it can be set down clean, who will refuse the world and keep the post. I am Corwin Vale. For 19 years I had stood the Queen's posts, and on one spring morning in the Amber Salon, I did the only thing I have ever truly been good at. I stood still. I watched. And when the moment came, I did not move until honor demanded it, and then I moved exactly as far as honor required, and not 1 inch further. That is the whole of it. That is the post. And I would stand it again tomorrow and every morning after for the rest of my days for the best of us, who asks the least.